Welcome to AI Journal Club, the digital pathology podcast segment where we take a closer look at the research shaping AI in pathology. This episode is one of our AI-powered summaries series, AI-generated deep dive into a paper worth your attention. It's curated from our weekly DigiPath Digest live stream that I run every Friday morning. I'm Dr. Alex Żuraw, and this is your shortcut to stay current. Let's dive into it.
Hello and welcome back, Trailblazers, to the Digital Pathology Podcast.
It is great to be here with you all for another deep dive.
If you are tuning in today, you're likely part of that dedicated group of healthcare professionals who are always scanning the horizon.
Scanning for the next real leap forward in diagnostic precision.
Exactly. And today, we are essentially running a high-level journal club for you, but we are skipping the stale coffee and the flickering fluorescent lights of the conference room.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. Instead, we are extracting the actionable insights from a really fascinating piece of complex medical literature.
And frankly, the paper we are discussing today tackles a clinical problem that has frustrated surgeons for decades.
Decades, yeah.
It is one of those areas where medicine still feels a bit like, like art or even guesswork, right when we desperately need it to be hard science.
So true. We are looking at a paper published in the Annals of Surgery.
A fantastic journal.
It really is. The title is a bit of a mouthful, though. It is called Automated Non-Invasive Burn Diagnostic System for Healthcare Using Artificial Intelligence, AMBU-USH AI.
ABO-EHH-AI. It is a memorable acronym.
It comes to us from a collaborative team, including Mohammed El-Masri, Emdema Sudhir-Rahman, and Gail Gordillo.
Bringing together the University of Pittsburgh, Purdue University, and Indiana University.
Right. A really strong multi-institutional effort.
It is. And just to set the stakes for you before we get into the actual tech, we need to talk about the hook.
The hook in the introduction.
Yeah, the part that grabbed me immediately because it frames the entire why of this technology.
I mean, the statistics on diagnostic accuracy?
That is the one.
Because I have to be honest, I read that paragraph twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating.
It is genuinely startling, isn't it? If you are an experienced burn surgeon, someone who has seen thousands of these injuries, someone who lives and breathes burn care, your accuracy in distinguishing a deep partial thickness burn from a full thickness third-degree burn is roughly 76%. That is the best case scenario.
Right, which is, okay, it is a passing grade, technically.
Barely.
But here's the part that terrified me. If you are a non-expert, say, a general surgeon, an ER doc, or a combat medic,
your accuracy drops to around 50%.
It is essentially a coin toss.
Literally a coin toss.
Think about that for a second. We have all this incredible technology in modern medicine, yet for a burn patient rolling into the ER, the decision on whether they need major surgery or just wound care is statistically equivalent to flipping a quarter.
That is the stark reality of it, and the stakes of that coin toss are massive for the patient.
Because we aren't talking about superficial burns here.
Right, not the ones that heal in 2 weeks with some ointment. And we aren't talking about the obviously charred fourth-degree injuries where the bone is exposed and the diagnosis is obvious.
We are talking about the gray zone.
Exactly, that deep, partial versus full-thickness injury. That is the ultimate diagnostic challenge. If you get it wrong, and you don't operate on a full-thickness burn, you end up with severe scarring, massive contractures, and functional loss. The patient's quality of life plummets.
And if you flip the coin the other way, like if you operate when you actually didn't need to,
then you have excised, perfectly healthy tissue that could have healed entirely on its own.
Wow.
You are putting the patient through the trauma of skin grafting and creating a donor site wound that they never needed.
So it is a lose-lose situation if your diagnosis is wrong.
Completely.
So currently, the gold standard to make this life-altering decision is just
looking at it.
Visual and tactile inspection. Literally just looking at the wound and touching it.
Does it blanch when you press it? Is it leathery? It is entirely subjective.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to explore how this team used AMBU-USH AI to try and outperform that coin toss.
And spoiler alert for the trailblazers listening, they didn't just beat the coin toss.
No, they are challenging the experts.
They are doing it by combining something very familiar in the hospital ultrasound with a very specific advanced type of AI architecture.
Let's unpack the technology first, because this is where it gets really clever. They use GE Healthcare LogiQ E9 and E10 systems.
Which is important to note.
Right. This isn't some custom prototype hardware held together with duct tape in a basement.
No, this is standard FDA-approved ultrasound gear that you can find in hospitals everywhere.
But they aren't just looking at the standard grainy black and white pictures we are all used to seeing, right?
No, standard B-mode ultrasound is useful, but it definitely has limits.
It gives you the anatomy.
Exactly. The B-mode gives you the landmarks. It lets you see the layers, the epidermis, the dermis, the hypodermis.
You need that just for orientation.
To know where you are looking, yes.
Yep.
But the secret sauce here is the second modality they collected.
Tissue Doppler elastography imaging, or TDI.
TDI is the key differentiator.
Elastography. I always think of the word elastic when I hear that. Is that the right way to think about it clinically?
Ideally, yes. TDI measures tissue stiffness. It is mapping the mechanical properties of the tissue.
And this is based on a fundamental biological premise regarding what happens during a burn, right?
Yes. When you have a severe thermal injury, the proteins in the skin and the subcutaneous tissue denature.
Like cooking an egg white.
That is the perfect analogy.
It goes from runny and pliable to solid and stiff.
Exactly like that. When those structural proteins denature from the heat, they uncoil and tangle together, and the tissue naturally becomes stiffer.
And TDI allows us to visualize that stiffness.
It visualizes it with a color code overlaid on the screen. In this specific study, they set it so red represented supple, healthy, elastic tissue.
And blue.
Blue represented stiff, burned, coagulated tissue.
So in a perfect world, you put the ultrasound probe on the patient, and if you see a big blue band down in the deep layers, you know you are in trouble.
That is the simplified version of it, yes.
But if it is that simple, like red is good, blue is bad, why do we even need the artificial intelligence?
It is a fair question.
Why can't I just look at the screen, see the blue, and say, let's go to surgery?
Because ultrasound imaging is inherently noisy. It is dynamic.
You have motion artifacts.
Motion artifacts, swirling colors from the probe pressure, and the transition between red and blue isn't always a crisp straight line.
It is a gradient.
A messy gradient. So the human eye interpreting those swirling colors is still subjective. You might look at the screen and see a lot of blue, whereas I might look at the same screen and see a mix of green and red.
Which puts us right back at the coin toss.
Exactly. That is where Ambuyu Peach AI comes in to standardize the interpretation and remove the human bias.
And I want to highlight a term the authors used here that I absolutely loved. They call their system a glass box model.
Yes, as opposed to the black box.
Right. Usually in tech, we always hear about the black box AI.
And this distinction is crucial for clinical adoption.
Why is that?
Well, in a lot of medical AI applications, you feed in the patient data, the computer crunches the numbers, and it spits out a diagnosis, but you have absolutely no idea how it got there.
It is a total mystery.
A mystery. A glass box model, on the other hand, offers explainability. It tells you the why.
I was actually looking at figure 4 in the paper. The AI explicitly outputs text that says things like, the dominant continuous blue pattern is present in the hypodermis, indicating increased tissue stiffness.
It is actually showing its work.
It is like a math test in grade school. You have to show your work.
Which is the only way a surgeon is ever going to trust it.
Right.
Surgeons are, let's say, thorough. They are not going to blindly trust a machine that just beeps and says, cut here, without explaining why.
They need the rationale.
This model says, I think this is a third-degree burn because I see the specific pattern of stiffness in this specific anatomical layer. It allows the human clinician to verify the findings.
So we have the hardware, the standard ultrasound, and we have the software, the glass box AI. Now let's talk about how they proved it actually works.
The validation phase.
Because this is where a lot of highly hyped medical tech falls apart. They started with a preclinical phase, using Yorkshire pigs.
Pigs are the gold standard for dermatological and burn research.
Because their skin physiology is similar to ours.
Remarkably similar. The thickness of the epidermis and dermis, the hair follicles, the healing properties, it is a very close match to human skin.
So they used 12 pigs.
12 female Yorkshire pigs. They created standardized burns of varying depths, superficial, partial, and full thickness, to train the initial AI framework.
And the results in that pig model were, well, perfect.
Literally perfect.
Yeah.
The AI identified the third-degree burns in the pigs with 100% accuracy.
Which is great, obviously. But pigs aren't people.
No, they are not.
We don't have perfectly standardized, clean burns in the real world. We have messy, complex injuries.
So they knew they had to move to a clinical phase with human patients.
They conducted a prospective single-site clinical trial from May 2022 to May 2023, and they enrolled 30 patients.
30 patients, yes. 21 male, 9 female.
I have to stop you right there, though. 30 patients. That sounds incredibly small.
It is small.
If this were a new cardiology drug trial, we would be laughing at an N of 30.
Yeah.
Can we really draw meaningful conclusions from a cohort that size?
It is a very fair critique, and certainly the authors frame this as a pilot study. However, for a diagnostic device study involving this level of detailed, invasive pathology, 30 is a decent starting point.
If the data quality is high.
Exactly, and that is where the rigorous design of this study really shines through.
You were talking about how they established the ground truth.
Yes. In a lot of diagnostic studies, they just compare the new AI test to the expert opinion.
But we already established in the introduction that expert opinion is only 76% accurate.
Right. So if the AI disagrees with the expert surgeon, who is right, you can't calibrate a precision instrument against a broken ruler.
So what did they do instead to find the actual truth?
For the patients who were scheduled to go to surgery, they didn't just guess the burn depth based on the outcome. They took physical biopsies in the operating room prior to the debridement.
They took actual tissue samples.
Actual tissue samples from the burn site.
That changes the math entirely.
It absolutely does. They used H and E stains, as well as Masson's trichrome stains, and they had blinded pathologists review those slides under a microscope to definitively say, this is exactly how deep the thermal damage went.
So they measured cellular reality.
That is the ultimate gold standard validation. You aren't comparing the AI to a surgeon's best guess. You're comparing it to the histological truth.
Okay, so with that rock-solid ground truth established, how did AMBUH-AI stack up in the human cohort?
The primary outcome was the model's accuracy in identifying those third-degree burns, the ones that definitively need surgery.
Yeah.
Overall, the AI achieved 95% accuracy.
95%.
Compared to the 50% of a non-expert.
That is a massive delta.
It is a complete game changer. But here is the specific statistic that matters most to me as a practicing clinician.
Let's hear it.
When you look only at the surgical cases, the patients who absolutely definitively needed an operation to prevent severe morbidity, the model identified 7 out of 7 correctly.
So 100% sensitivity for the surgical cases. It didn't miss a single one.
It didn't miss a single one.
That is incredible.
It is critical because undercalling a burn is dangerous. You never want to send a patient home or to a regular ward thinking they are fine when they actually have a full thickness burn that needs an excision and a graft.
Right, because that leads to the contractures we talked about.
Exactly. This system caught every single surgical case.
What about the other way around, though? Did it say anyone needed surgery when they actually didn't?
There was only one false positive in the entire cohort.
Okay.
It predicted surgery for one single patient who turned out not to need it based on the pathology. It correctly identified 15 out of 16 non-surgical cases.
So 1 overcall, but 0 undercalls. In a chaotic triage situation, particularly in a busy ER or a battlefield scenario, I will take that trade-off any day of the week.
Absolutely. You would always rather err on the side of caution with these injuries. But even with that one false positive, the specificity is still incredibly high compared to clinical judgment alone.
Another technical detail they mentioned was doing a frame-by-frame analysis. They analyzed something like 235 individual video frames from the ultrasound clips. Why does that matter? Why not just take one really good picture?
Because the real world is messy and unpredictable. The ultrasound probe is moving. The patient might be flinching because they are in severe pain.
There's always motion artifact in ultrasound.
Always. If your AI model only works on a perfect, frozen, high-resolution still image taken in a sterile lab, it is totally useless in a real trauma bay.
That makes sense.
They show that even when analyzing the data frame by frame, the accuracy remained robust. It was around 89% accurate on a per-frame basis, which aggregated to that 95% overall patient diagnosis.
It means the system is stable.
Very stable. Even when the operator's hand isn't perfectly still or the angle shifts slightly, the AI doesn't get confused.
And just to put a nice bow on the statistical math for our trailblazers, they ran a permutation test, and it came back with a p-value of 0.00001.
Which is essentially statistician speak for this was not a fluke.
Right.
The AURC was 0.97. The results are statistically highly, highly significant.
So let's pivot to the what phase of our deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Why should our listeners care about a pilot study with 30 patients? What does this mean for the future of everyday practice?
I think it connects directly back to the idea of democratizing medical expertise.
Like POSI-US.
Exactly like PMCID, point-of-care ultrasound. We talk about it all the time now.
Usually we think about it for finding difficult veins or doing a fast exam to look for free fluid in the abdomen after a car crash.
Right. But this is effectively adding a specialized burn expert software update to that same portable POCUS device.
The paper explicitly mentions funding from the Department of Defense. You can very easily see the military application here.
Imagine a combat medic on a battlefield or stationed at a forward operating base. They have a ruggedized tablet because this AMBU etch system is designed to run on portable tablet-based devices and an ultrasound probe.
They scan a casualty's burn.
And the AI instantly tells them, this is full thickness, you need to evacuate this soldier immediately for surgery, versus this is superficial, you can treat them in place with dressings.
It takes all the guesswork out of an incredibly stressful, chaotic environment.
And that exact same logic applies equally to rural medicine.
Oh, absolutely.
If a patient comes into a small critical access hospital that is 3 hours away from a specialized burn center, the ER doc there usually has to make a blind call.
Do I put him on a helicopter? Do I keep him here?
This tool gives that rural doctor the diagnostic confidence of a specialist who has been treating burns for 20 years.
It optimizes our resource utilization across the board. We are saving the scarce resource, which is the expert burn surgeon, and the specialized burn ICU bed for the complex cases that truly need them.
And for the patient themselves, it means significantly earlier diagnosis.
Which means faster treatment.
Yes. If you know definitively on day 1 that it is a full thickness burn, you can operate on day 2 or day 3. You don't have to wait 2 agonizing weeks to see if it heals on its own.
That prevents pathological scarring.
It reduces hospital stays, cuts down on infection risk, and gets people back to their normal lives much faster.
However, we are running a high-level journal club here, so we have to remain critical. We already flagged the small sample size as an issue. What are the other limitations the authors found?
The authors are very transparent about a few key limitations. First, the classification in this current iteration of the study was strictly binary.
It was either third-degree surgical versus non-third degree.
Correct.
But real burn wounds aren't always binary, are they?
No, rarely. Burn wounds are notoriously heterogeneous. A patient might have a large burned area on their back that is mostly deep partial thickness, but with scattered islands of full thickness damage.
Or a wound that is right on the borderline.
Exactly. The current AI model just says, yes, surgery or no surgery for the region, it is scanning.
The authors noted that the software needs to evolve to actually quantify the proportion of the burn.
Right. Clinically, it would be much more helpful if the AI could scan the whole arm and output. 60% of this wound is full thickness and 40% is deep partial.
That nuance is the logical next step for the software development.
It is.
I'm also curious about how this specific system compares to other existing tech, like laser Doppler imaging. I know LDI exists for burns, but it's not widely used in most centers. Does this ultrasound system solve some of LDI's problems?
That is a great point to bring up.
Yeah.
LDI uses light to assess blood flow. Because it uses light, it inherently struggles with surface reflection. If a patient has a large fluid-filled blister over the burn, the laser light reflects off the surface of the blister, and the machine can't see the tissue underneath.
And what about skin tone? I imagine light absorption can be affected by skin pigmentation.
It absolutely is. Darker skin with more melanin might read differently on an LDI scan than lighter skin, which introduces a major variable. Plus, LDI is notoriously sensitive to patient movement and even the ambient temperature in the room. And it isn't very reliable on injuries that are less than 24 hours old.
That is a lot of limitations.
It is why it hasn't become a universal standard. But ultrasound uses sound waves, not light.
And sound waves don't care about melanin.
Exactly. Sound waves penetrate right through the skin pigment, right through the blisters, down to the deep tissue structure.
So theoretically, this AMBI-SH AI system should be much more consistent and equitable across diverse patient populations.
Precisely. And regardless of whether the burn has blistered yet or not,
that is a significant technical advantage. We are removing a huge source of variance from the diagnostic process.
And there is one other very practical point the authors raised about the ultrasound that I found interesting.
What is that?
Pain.
Oh, right. You are physically pressing an ultrasound probe onto a fresh, raw burn. That sounds excruciating.
I winced just reading that part of the methodology. I can't imagine letting someone touch a fresh third-degree burn with a hard plastic probe.
But they reported no adverse events or pain complaints in the study.
None. They use standard hospital analgesia, of course, but the real key is the TDI quality bar built into the software.
How does that help with pain?
Remember the green, red, and blue indicator for stiffness? It actually helps ensure the operator is applying consistent, very light pressure. If you press too hard with the probe, you compress the tissue and distort the elastography image entirely.
So the technology itself physically forces the operator to use a gentle touch.
It requires a light touch to work properly, so it ends up being very tolerable for the patient.
So if we look at the big picture, we have a system that is non-invasive, practically painless, more accurate than a coin toss, and actually better than an expert surgeon.
It explains its own reasoning through the glass box, and it works on standard, off-the-shelf, FDA-approved hardware.
It is an incredibly promising package. It is taking existing signals, the B-mode anatomy and the elastography stiffness, and using AI to decode them in a way the human eye simply can't do consistently.
It effectively gives every clinician supervision, or maybe more accurately, super touch.
Computational palpation. I really like that term.
It perfectly describes what is happening. It is quantifying exactly what surgeons used to just feel with their fingertips.
I want to circle back to the glass box aspect one more time before we wrap up our analysis. Why do you think the research team put so much emphasis on that specific feature? Is it really that critical for the algorithm to speak to the doctor?
Trust is the ultimate currency of any new medical technology.
That is very true.
We have seen plenty of highly accurate AI tools fail to gain traction because they were opaque. If you have a mysterious black box that just prints out amputate on a piece of paper, no responsible surgeon is going to follow it.
They can't defend that decision.
Exactly. But if the box says the tissue stiffness in the hypodermis here is consistent with dead dermis, the surgeon can look at the ultrasound screen, see the continuous blue pattern for themselves, and say, I see it too.
It acts as a decision support tool.
Not a decision replacement tool. It augments the human clinician rather than trying to replace them entirely.
That partnership between the human intuition and the AI processing power seems to be the sweet spot for modern medicine.
Yeah.
It keeps the human in the loop, but gives them infinitely better data to work with.
It absolutely is the sweet spot. And looking at the broader historical picture, this fits perfectly into the long-term trend of objective wound assessment.
Moving away from subjective description.
For centuries, wound care has been entirely about describing things with adjectives. It looks red, it smells bad, it feels hot to the touch.
Very imprecise.
We are finally moving toward hard metrics. It has a stiffness index of X. It has a bacterial load of Y. We are turning subjective poetry into objective data.
And hard data is what drives better patient outcomes.
Precisely.
So, to summarize the deep dive for our trailblazers today, this study, published in the Annals of Surgery, introduces the AmbuH AI system,
which uses ultrasound elastography to diagnose burn depth based on tissue stiffness.
And in a human trial, validated by actual operating room biopsies, which is the massive key differentiator here, it hit 95% overall accuracy and 100% sensitivity for the surgical cases.
Vastly outperforming the current clinical standard of visual inspection.
It is a massive potential game changer for triage, especially in non-specialist settings like the military frontline or rural ERs.
But of course, the next step is we need to see it scale up. We need to go from an N of 30 to an N of 3,000.
Multi-center trials.
We need large multi-center trials to ensure this algorithm holds up across hundreds of different hospitals, different ultrasound machines, and different operators.
But the foundational proof of concept is incredibly strong.
Unquestionably.
So here is my final provocative thought for you to take with you today.
I love these.
We talked a lot today about computational palpation. We rely on our human hands for so much in medicine. Feeling for a rigid tumor, feeling for abdominal guarding during an exam, feeling for joint effusion in a knee.
It is the basis of the physical exam.
Right. But if an ultrasound probe combined with AI can feel tissue stiffness in a burn with greater accuracy than an expert surgeon's hand, what else could it feel?
That is a fascinating question. Could it palpate a liver for early-stage fibrosis better than we can?
Exactly. Could it assess the mechanical caving in a torn ligament better than a standard orthopedic jaw test?
The possibilities are endless when you think about it.
We are shifting from visual medicine to computational tissue analysis. The screen is rapidly becoming more sensitive than the fingertip.
And that opens up a whole new frontier of non-invasive diagnostics.
Thank you so much for listening to the Digital Pathology podcast today. We highly encourage you to look up the original paper in the Annals of Surgery.
The visual images of the blue hypodermis versus the red healthy tissue are really worth seeing to fully understand the glass box concept we talked about.
It really makes the data click when you see it on the page. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep blazing those trails.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you next time.
That's it for this AI Journal Club episode. If you want more like this, make sure you're subscribed to the Digital Pathology podcast. And come join us for the DigiPath Digest, our weekly live session. During these live streams, you can vote which paper becomes an AI deep dive. And if you're serious about digital pathology, grab my free book at digitalpathologyplace.com. This is the best place to start your digital pathology journey. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.